Welcome to the Deep Dive. Really excited about the story we're unpacking today. We're getting into the life and the legacy of Kwame Nkrumah, the leader who brought Ghana to independence and really championed that dream of a united Africa.
That's right. And just to be clear for everyone listening, our whole discussion today, everything we talk about, it's drawn straight from one source, a YouTube video transcript. It's titled, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and the Dream of Uniting Africa.
Yeah, so our goal here is basically to pull out the key insights, the important details from that specific transcript. We want you to really get a sense of Nkrumah's journey, his big ideas, and, well, the complicated stuff, too, what led to his downfall, all based on what this source tells us.
Exactly. And the source, it kind of sets the scene right away. It tells us, Nkrumah frees Ghana from Britain in 57. He has this massive vision for uniting Africa.
Yeah.
He survives assassination attempts, gets removed in a coup in 66, but leaves this, what the source calls an eternal legacy. The whole Nkrumah never dies idea.
Yeah. And that his ideas are still relevant.
The source makes that point, too.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so let's dive in where the source starts. His early life, what shaped him?
All right, so the source tells us he was born in 1909. His father was a goldsmith, his mother a retail trader. Pretty humble beginnings, it seemed.
And education.
He went to Akimoto College. The source points out this was a pretty prestigious Catholic school.
And didn't the source mention something about him initially wanting to be a priest? That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it does. Apparently, he was serious about religion early on, but then, politics sort of took over, became the stronger pull.
So that pull took him overseas.
It did.
Huh.
The source details his trip to the U.S. in 1935. He studied at Lincoln University, then the University of Pennsylvania, got his master's by 1939.
And the source really emphasizes this time in America, right, as being crucial for his thinking.
Absolutely pivotal, yeah. Says he was just reading constantly, soaking up different ideas.
Like what specifically?
Well, the source highlights two main streams: socialist thinkers like Marx and Lenin, and also the Pan-Africanism of Marcus Garvey. It's interesting how the source shows these kind of merging in his mind.
And you can see him putting ideas into action pretty quickly, even while he was still in the States. The source says he became president of the African Students Organization of the United States of Canada.
Right. Already leading, already thinking about connecting Africans beyond just one colony or one place.
Okay, so he's got these ideas, this organizing experience. What's next, according to the source?
He leaves the U.S. in May 1945, goes to England.
And still focused on the bigger African picture there.
Oh, yeah. The source mentions he was a key organizer for the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester, a really important gathering for the whole anti-colonial movement.
Meanwhile, back in the Gold Coast, what's happening there?
Well, the source explains that the United Gold Coast Convention, the UGCC, had formed. It was the main party pushing for self-government, but through constitutional means. More gradual, maybe.
And they invited Nkrumah back. Yep. To be their general secretary. So he returns home, but things were heating up. Protests, riots against the British, and the source says Nkrumah quickly became a person of interest to the authorities.
A target, basically.
Pretty much. He was arrested briefly in February 48, along with other UGCC leaders. The source mentions that.
And this led to a break, didn't it, between him and the UGCC?
It did. The source says in 1949, he splits off, forms his own party, the Convention People's Party, the CPP.
And the big difference, according to the source?
The timeline. The CPP was all about immediate self-government now, not gradual constitutional steps. That's the key distinction the source makes.
Okay, so how do they plan to achieve that?
Through something Nkrumah called positive action, starting in 1950. The source details this.
Positive action. What did that actually mean on the ground, based on the source?
It was about nonviolent resistance, making things difficult for the British rulers. The source lists things like nonviolent protests, strikes, boycotting British authorities, British businesses, that kind of thing.
And this landed him in trouble again.
Oh, yeah. Arrested again, sentenced to a year in prison, according to the source.
But his party, the CPP, was still gaining ground.
Massively. The source highlights the first general election in February 1951. The CPP wins big, and incredibly, Nkrumah gets elected to parliament while he's still in jail.
Wow. And then the source describes his release.
Yeah, quite dramatically. It says he was, and this is a quote from the source, freed by the governor as an act of grace, right before a new constitution came in.
Huh. An act of grace.
Make of that what you will.
Yeah.
But it opened the door. The source says by 1952, he becomes the first prime minister of Ghana.
Leading up to the big moment in 1957.
Exactly. Ghana declares independence. The first country south of the Sahara to do it, as the source points out. Hugely symbolic.
And the source gives that quote from his independence speech. Something about.
Yeah, it's a fragment. Power then to independence now, tomorrow, the United States of Africa.
Captures it all, doesn't it? Ghana first. But the vision is already continental.
Absolutely. The source really uses that quote to show his dual focus from the very start.
Okay, so by 1960, he's president. Let's shift his time in charge. Domestic policy development. What does the source highlight?
It characterizes his government as broadly nationalist and socialist.
So what did that translate to? The source mentions Africanization of the civil service. What's that about?
The source implies it's about replacing the colonial-era British officials with Ghanaians, putting Ghanaians in charge of running Ghana, basically, making the government reflect the newly independent nation.
Makes sense. And social programs.
Big ones. The source mentions free education, free health care, and it specifically notes his push in education to challenge the sort of Eurocentric bias in the old British system, challenging the white supremacy embedded in textbooks and institutions.
Trying to build a truly Ghanaian education system.
Right. And culturally, the source says he actively fought against tribalism, seeing it as a divide-and-rule tactic from the colonial era. He wanted to promote a unified Pan-African culture within Ghana itself. Things like calling for international libraries, cooperative study of African history. He set up the Ghana Museum, the Arts Council, the Ghana Film Corporation national institutions to foster that shared culture, according to the source.
And getting the message out. Media.
Yeah, the source lists quite a few initiatives. Created the Ghana News Agency, the Ghanaian Times newspaper, the Ghana Broadcast Corporation.
And that broadcast service went international.
It did. The source mentions an external service broadcasting in English, French, Arabic, Swahili, Portuguese, Hausa, reaching across Africa and beyond.
What about the economy? Did things improve after independence, according to the source?
Well, the source says initially yes. It talks about expansion in forestry, fishing, cattle breeding, cocoa production, the main export doubled, even gold mining became more effective. So some early successes noted in the source.
But he had bigger ambitions than just managing existing resources, right? The source mentions industrialization.
Definitely. Rapid industrialization was a key goal. The biggest project the source highlights is the dam on the Volta River.
The Volta Dam. Why was that so important?
Two main reasons, according to the source. Irrigation for farming, and crucially, hydroelectric power. Nkrumah saw cheap power as essential for, real economic independence, breaking free from just exporting raw materials.
And it wasn't all huge state projects. The source mentions village-level stuff, too.
Yeah, it does. Government funds go into villages so local people could build their own schools, roads, a sort of self-help element.
And then there's the nuclear program the source mentions, starting in 61.
Right. Ghana Atomic Energy Commission in 63, laying the first stone for a facility in 64. It shows the scale of his ambition, I think, really aiming high for Ghana's technological future.
Which ties into his wider vision beyond Ghana, that Pan-African focus. How did he see Ghana fitting into the continent, based on the source?
The source is really clear on this. Nkrumah saw Ghana's independence as just the first step. He believed Africa had to face imperialism and what he called neocolonialism.
Neocolonialism meaning indirect control after independence.
Yeah, economic or political pressure from former colonial powers or others. He thought Africa had to fight this together as a united front. Unity was everything because, as the source puts his view, enemies would exploit division and weakness.
So the ultimate aim was deep integration across Africa, political, economic, military.
That was the dream, according to the source, and he took concrete steps.
Like what? What actions does the source list?
Creating new Pan-African organizations, hosting conferences. The source mentions ones for trade unions, women's groups, coordinating security around issues like Algeria, South Africa, French nuclear testing.
He also pulled Ghana out of some old colonial structures.
Yes, the source notes withdrawing from things like the West African Airways Corporation, the West African Currency Board, cutting those old ties.
And he tried forming actual political union.
He did. The source mentions the Union of African States in 1960, an alliance between Ghana, Guinea, and Mali, an early attempt at that political integration.
All leading towards the OAU.
Exactly. The Organization of African Unity. The source emphasizes Nkrumah was a founding father. Established in Addis Ababa in 1963, with 32 African countries signing on initially.
And the OAU's goals, as listed in the source.
Quite ambitious. Eradicate colonialism completely, boost cooperation between states, defend their sovereignty and independence, ensure human rights, improve living standards, settle disputes peacefully. The source actually compares its aims to the EU today.
Wow, quite the list. And the source notes the OAU was replaced by the African Union later in 2002.
It does. Now, internationally, with his socialist leanings, the source points out he started looking east more.
Tours to Eastern Europe, the USSR, China.
Right. Which, as the source puts it, landed him in the not-so-favorite in Washington camp.
So Western powers saw him as a threat.
That's the perspective presented in the source. Concern about Soviet influence spreading, potentially undermining Western interests, military, economic, cultural hegemony.
And Nkrumah's view on that external pressure.
Defiant. The source quotes him warning against letting imperialists and neocolonialists conspire with traitors in our midst. He saw it as a battle for Africa's future.
Okay, but this huge focus on the continental stage. The source suggests it came at a cost back home.
Yeah, this is where the source brings in the challenges and the eventual decline. It explicitly says many critics argue his focus on external affairs led to big mistakes at home.
What kind of mistakes or problems does the source detail?
Well, money, for one. Ghana took on a lot of debt for the Volta Dam and other big projects. Plus, the source mentions sending aid and even military units to support liberation movements elsewhere. Congo, Guinea, Rhodesia added to the debt.
And the assassination attempts. What effect did they have, according to the source?
Led to a bigger, more powerful internal security service. A tighter grip, perhaps.
And the political shift.
Right. Early 1964, the source states Ghana officially becomes a one-party state. Nkrumah is made president for life of the country and the party. The opposition, the source notes, saw this as a real abuse of power.
And all this against a backdrop of economic problems.
Yeah, the source links the debt, the foreign spending, some funds being misallocated, and falling prices for cocoa. It all led to an economic crisis. Shortages of food and other goods became chronic, the source says.
So his popularity started to slip.
The source indicates it did, yeah. Among the elite, but also ordinary people. It mentions general strikes and protests as signs of this growing discontent.
Which brings us to the coup.
February 1966. While Nkrumah was away on a state visit North Vietnam and China, the source specifies the army and police back in Ghana seized power.
And that was it for his rule.
That was it. When he tried to return, he couldn't. The source says he found asylum in Guinea and lived there for the rest of his life.
Passed away in 72.
Yes, died of cancer in Bucharest, Romania, according to the source.
The source throws in a little personal detail, too, about his marriage.
Oh, yeah, kind of randomly. Mentions he married Fafia Nkrumah, an Egyptian Coptic woman, literally on New Year's Eve 1957-58, the night she arrived in Ghana.
Huh. Okay, so circling back to the end, the source really stresses his legacy, right?
It does. Uses that phrase, eternal legacy, mentions his writings, and even points to him being referenced by the grime artist Stormzy, showing his story reaching new generations. And of course, that line, Nkrumah never dies.
So, listening to this breakdown based on the source, we've covered a huge span. From student activist influenced by socialism and Pan-Africanism.
Through leading the independence fight, building a nation, launching ambitious projects, championing this grand vision for Africa.
But also facing massive debts, internal dissent, becoming a one-party state, and ultimately being overthrown in a coup.
Yeah, the source really paints a picture of both the triumphs and the factors leading to his downfall. That tension is clear.
The tension between the huge continental dream and the perhaps more mundane but critical issues at home. The source definitely highlights how some saw his external focus as detrimental domestically.
Absolutely, and it leaves you with that idea from the source that despite the coup, despite the criticisms, his ideas, his influence, they didn't just disappear. Nkrumah never dies.
So thinking just about what this source presented, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? This immense ambition uniting a whole continent, politically, economically, militarily. Is it even possible to pursue something that big, that externally focused, without inevitably creating serious strains and problems back home? The source certainly suggests Nkrumah's story is a powerful case study of that very dilemma.
It's a tough balance, for sure. A really provocative question raised by the narrative in this source.
Indeed it is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive.